Had nothing at all? A millionaire CEO sits in his heated penthouse, expensive whiskey warming his hands, while just beyond his frosted window, a mother clutches her shivering child against a bitter winter night. Have you ever walked past someone in desperate need and felt that uncomfortable pull in your chest? That moment when your comfortable world collides with someone else's harsh reality? Tonight, Julian Graves, ruthless businessman worth $47 million, is about to face exactly that choice. What he does next will shock his closest friends, transform two lives forever, and spark a movement that spreads across an entire city. But here's the question that will haunt you. When faced with someone else's suffering, what would you choose? If you've ever struggled with doing the right thing, when it costs you something, hit that like button right now. Because this story will challenge everything you think you know about human nature. What happens next? You won't believe it. Julian Graves didn't build his empire by being soft. At 38, he commanded a global tech corporation with offices spanning 3 continents. His colleagues knew him as the man who could cut million-dollar deals without blinking, fire entire departments to boost quarterly profits, and negotiate contracts that left competitors wondering what just happened. His Manhattan townhouse reflected that same calculated precision. Marble floors imported from Italy, custom furniture that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of the city he'd conquered. Tonight, those windows revealed a world most wealthy people never truly see. The temperature had plummeted to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow accumulated in thick drifts along the sidewalks, transforming the usually bustling street into an Arctic wasteland. Inside Julian's climate-controlled sanctuary, the only sound was the gentle hum of his heating system working overtime to maintain a perfect 72 degrees. But here's what most people didn't know about Julian Graves. His ruthless business persona was armor, carefully constructed over decades. 25 years earlier, he'd been the kid whose single mother worked 3 jobs just to keep their 1-bedroom apartment warm. He'd worn second-hand clothes to school and learned to ignore the hunger pangs when dinner was just crackers and peanut butter. That childhood felt like someone else's life now. Success had a way of erasing uncomfortable memories, replacing them with a confidence that came from never having to worry about money again. Comment below if you know someone who seems tough on the outside, but carries a story underneath. Because Julian's about to discover that some memories refuse to stay buried. As he settled into his leather armchair with that glass of aged whiskey, Julian had no idea he was about to face the biggest decision of his adult life. That's when Julian first noticed him through his window. A woman and a small boy huddled together on the sidewalk directly across from his building. The woman, later he would learn her name was Daria Clark, had wrapped her arms around the child, creating a human shield against the wind that cut through the street like razor blades. Ezra couldn't have been more than 6 years old. His tiny frame pressed against his mother's chest while she whispered something into his ear. Words Julian couldn't hear, but somehow knew were promises. Promises that everything would be okay, that warmth would come, that tomorrow would be better. Julian's first instinct was logical, rational, practical, the same thinking that had built his fortune. Surely there were shelters available. Social services existed for exactly the situation. Someone else, someone whose job it was to handle these problems, would step in. The city had systems in place. He took a sip of his whiskey and tried to return to the financial reports scattered across his coffee table. Quarterly projections demanded his attention. The Tokyo merger needed final approval, real responsibilities that affected real money. But every few minutes, his eyes drifted back to that window. Daria had found a piece of cardboard, probably from a discarded box, and was trying to create a windbreak for Ezra. Her own lips were turning blue, but she kept positioning herself between her son and the worst of the cold. The sight stirred something uncomfortable in Julian's chest, a feeling he'd spent years learning to ignore. The way Daria held Ezra, protective, desperate, refusing to let the world break her child, hit Julian like a physical blow. Suddenly he was 8 years old again, standing in a cramped apartment where his mother, Maria Graves, was doing the exact same thing. He remembered the winter their heat got shut off because she had to choose between electricity and gas. His mother had gathered every blanket in their tiny place, wrapping him tight while she shivered in just a thin sweater. She'd told him stories about brave knights in distant kingdoms, her voice steady even as her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. "We're going to be fine, baby," she'd whispered, the same words he now watched Daria whisper to Ezra. "Mama's got you. Everything's going to be okay." His mother had worked double shifts at the diner just to keep them afloat after his father walked out. Some nights she'd pretend she wasn't hungry so Julian could have her portion of whatever cheap meal they'd managed to scrape together. The whiskey glass felt heavy in his hand now, weighted with more than just expensive liquor. Those memories he'd buried under years of success were clawing their way to the surface. Share this if you believe our past shapes who we become. Because Julian's about to discover that some lessons from childhood never truly leave us. 1 hour passed. Then 2. Julian tried returning to his work, but the numbers on his laptop screen blurred together. Every time he glanced outside, Daria was still there, still holding Ezra, still whispering reassurances into the bitter night. The rational voice in his head grew quieter while something else grew louder, his mother's voice from all those years ago. "Julian, baby, when you have more than you need, you help those who need more than they have." By the 3rd hour, Ezra had stopped moving. The little boy wasn't crying anymore, wasn't shifting against his mother's embrace. He was just still, too still. Julian's heart began racing. He watched Daria shake her son gently, trying to keep him responsive. She was losing the battle against the cold, and they both knew it. Her movements were becoming slower, more deliberate, as hypothermia began setting in. The whiskey sat forgotten on the windowsill, growing as cold as the night outside. Here's where everything changes. Because Julian Graves, the man who built his life on calculated risks and measured responses, was about to make the most impulsive decision of his entire career. He set down the glass, stood up from his leather chair, and walked directly toward his front door. Julian burst through his front door without grabbing a coat, the freezing air hitting him like a wall. He crossed the street in seconds, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the icy pavement. "Ma'am," he called out, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Ma'am, please, you and your son need to come inside right now." Daria looked up, startled. Her face was pale, her lips nearly purple from the cold. Suspicion flashed in her eyes. After all, strangers offering help in the middle of the night usually came with strings attached. "I'm not trying to hurt you," Julian said quickly, seeing her hesitation. "My name is Julian. I live right there." He pointed to his townhouse. "Your son, he's not responding well to this cold. You both need warmth immediately." Something in his voice, maybe the genuine panic she heard there, made Daria nod. With Julian's help, she struggled to her feet, lifting Ezra's small, nearly lifeless form. Inside Julian's heated home, the transformation was immediate. Color began returning to both their faces as Julian wrapped them in blankets from his couch. He turned his thermostat to 80 degrees and started making phone calls. "Marcus, it's Julian. I need you to listen carefully." His assistant's sleepy voice came through the speaker. "I need emergency housing secured within the hour, a safe apartment, fully furnished. Medical care for a woman and child experiencing hypothermia. And connect me with the best job placement services in the city." But Julian wasn't finished. Over the next 2 hours, he arranged something that shocked even his own assistant. A full college trust fund for Ezra's education, complete with housing stipends and living expenses covered through graduation. Daria sat in stunned silence as Julian explained each arrangement. This wasn't charity. This was a complete life transformation happening in real time. Hit subscribe if you believe in the power of second chances, because what happened next proved that one night of genuine human connection can change everything. By morning, the story of Julian's actions had already begun spreading throughout the building, then the neighborhood, then across social media. Within 48 hours, Julian's story had reached every major news outlet in the city. The headline that caught fire read, "Tech CEO's Midnight Rescue Sparks Citywide Compassion Movement." But the real transformation wasn't happening in boardrooms. It was happening on street corners, in coffee shops, and in the hearts of ordinary people who suddenly saw their neighbors differently. Marcus Chun, who owned a luxury car dealership 3 blocks away, read the story over his morning coffee. That afternoon, he personally drove to the local homeless shelter and committed to providing transportation for job interviews. Permanently. If Julian can risk his reputation, Marcus told reporters, I can risk a few car miles. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, a pediatrician who lived in Julian's neighborhood, established a mobile medical unit that operated every Friday night, providing free health care to families living on the streets. She'd been thinking about it for months, but never found the courage to start. The movement grew beyond individual acts. Local businesses began coordinating efforts. The bakery on 5th Street started providing daily meals. The community center opened its doors every night as temporary shelter space. Even the teenagers at the nearby high school organized winter clothing drives. Julian found himself at the center of something he never intended to create, a network of people who had simply decided to stop walking past those in need. But the story doesn't end there, because Daria Clark had her own transformation ahead. 6 months later, she landed a position as a community outreach coordinator, using her experience to help other families facing homelessness. Ezra started first grade in a stable home, his trust fund secured for college. The boy who almost froze on a winter sidewalk now had a future that his mother could never have dreamed of that terrible night. So what can we learn from Julian's transformation that freezing night? The answer goes deeper than simple charity or random acts of kindness. First, our past experiences, especially our struggles, aren't burdens to bury. They're compass points that can guide us toward genuine empathy. Julian's childhood poverty didn't disappear when he became wealthy. It became the bridge that connected him to Daria's desperation. Second, the barriers between us and others suffering are often just glass. Transparent but real. We see the need, we feel the discomfort, but we convince ourselves that someone else will handle it. Julian could have closed his curtains, but he chose to open his door instead. Third, transformation doesn't require perfection. Julian wasn't a saint who suddenly discovered compassion. He was a flawed human who remembered what it felt like to be vulnerable and decided that memory mattered more than his comfort zone. The most powerful lesson? Your response to someone else's crisis reveals who you really are when nobody's watching. Julian thought he was saving Daria and Ezra, but he was actually rescuing the part of himself he'd forgotten existed. Tell us in the comments about a time when someone's kindness changed your life. Because every person has the power to be someone else's Julian. Remember that question I asked at the beginning? What would you do if you had everything but witnessed someone who had nothing? Julian Graves found his answer that winter night, and it changed 2 lives forever. What's your answer going to be? Smash that subscribe button, hit the like, share this story, and let me know in the comments what you would have done. Next week, we're exploring another incredible true story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature.